after a very long, um, it wasn't a hiatus, it wasn't an adventure. Let's call it an adventure. I should have asked before we went live. Do you have a beverage? Okay, well, everybody listening, get your cup, your mug, your glass, your tankard, your chalice, your thermos, your stein, your canteen, jug, or flask, your vessel of any kind, and fill it with your favorite liquid. I've got sugar-free Coke here. And join us now for the unparalleled pleasure, the dopamine hit of the day, the thing that makes literally all the things in your life and the world better. It's called the simultaneous sip, and it happens now. Go. Oh, man. Can you feel it? I can feel it. That feels good. All right, to remind everybody where we are, this is Mind Philosophy, Class 8, and we are in the midst of trying to figure out if behaviorism is a tenable philosophical theory. We're going to discover that it kind of isn't, and then we're going to move on to functionalism, which is a way of maybe saving it and revising it a little bit. The essay we're reading today is by J.J.C. Smart, who is an individual that we have seen and will see in a lot of these year one anthologies. Okay, this paper takes its departure. All right, yeah, we can skip the first paragraph. Okay. Suppose that I report that I have at this moment a roundish, blurry edged after image, which is yellowish towards its edge and is orange towards its center. What is it that I'm reporting? One answer to this question might be that I am not reporting anything. That when I say that it looks to me as though there is a roundish yellow orangey patch of light on the wall, I am expressing some sort of temptation. The temptation to say that there is a roundish yellow orange patch on the wall, though I may know that there is no such patch on the wall, perhaps. This is perhaps Wittgenstein's view in the Philosophical Investigations. Similarly, when I report a pain, I am not really reporting anything. Or if you like, I am reporting in a queer sense of reporting, but I am doing a sophisticated sort of wince. Okay, so this goes right along with the behaviorist way of thinking, right? If you want to invent a science, if you want to be scientific, if you're a philosopher who has penis envy for scientism, then you want to talk about things which are measurable and which all the community of scientists can have a consensus and say, yeah, I did that in my lab too, and I measured that exact same thing. And the problem with the philosophy of mind is that it has a lot to do with subjective experience of individuals. And so what they want to do is not just say, why don't we only talk about the outward signs of those experiences? But what they actually want to do is redefine all of the terms in folk psychology, all of the terms in the subjective realm. They want to redefine them as nothing other than things which are measurable. So again, to be in pain is to jump up and down going owie, 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 and holding your toe and crying. That's what it means to be in pain. That's not what it means to say, I can see evidence that you're in pain. That's what pain is. All right. Now, we're nearing the end of this section, and we're going to find that behaviorism, it has problems that are illustrated by that joke we told before. Who was the joke at the expense of whom was the joke?
I don't recall.
Singer? Oh man, I'm having an old person moment where my mind is giving me a brain fart here. Pinker, maybe? I can't remember who it was, but there's a behaviorist and he's in bed with his wife and he turns to his wife and he says, that was good for you. Was it good for me? Because the evidence that you're having a subjectively good experience is all something that you would be privileged to witness from the outside, but you have no access to some sort of special position to register it from the inside because that's all meaningless talk. All right. So in any case, he's saying it's nothing but a sophisticated sort of wince. If I say I am in pain, I'm not making a factual claim. That's not a proposition that's reporting anything that could be true or false. It's just I'm wincing. Okay, quote, the verbal expression of pain replaces crying and does not describe it, nor does it describe anything else. I prefer most of the time to discuss an after image rather than a pain because the word pain brings in something which is irrelevant to my purpose, which is the notion of distress. I think that he is in pain entails he is in distress. That is, that he is in a certain agitated condition. Similarly, to say I am in pain may be to do more than replace pain behavior. It may be partly to report something, though this something is quite non-mysterious, being an agitated condition, and so susceptible of behavioristic analysis. The suggestion I wish, if possible, to avoid is a different one, namely that I am in pain is a genuine report, and that what it reports is an irreducibly psychological something. And similarly, the suggestion I wish to resist is also that to say, I have a yellowish orange after image is to report something irreducibly psychical. Okay, this is important. So the reason why he's going to get off of the pain topic is that he says, well, it has this other aspect to it that I don't want to get distracted by, which is I'm reporting that I'm in distress. But what if I just told you I'm looking at the wall? Maybe I was looking at the sun a moment before I was looking at the wall, but I'm looking at the wall and I'm telling you that what I'm seeing or seeming to see, or what I say is I see a yellowish on the edge and orangish in the middle blob on the wall. I know it not to be there, perhaps even, but I'm just reporting it. He says, are you reporting anything? Are you telling me anything that I could measure, that I could point to? He's going to try to argue, it seems, that you're not actually. Now, it seems to us that you are reporting something. I'm telling you about my psychic experience, my psychological state. I'm telling you, it seems to me that I'm looking at an orangish blotch on the wall. And you know what that means. And that all seems meaningful to us, but not to the behaviorists. They're trying to argue that we've made a mistake, and philosophically, we should recognize that those statements aren't referring to anything. They're not a report of anything. It's maybe an action that signifies something about me, but I shouldn't look towards, I wonder what it's like inside the mind to be having that experience, because that's not something measurable, and they want to make a science out of their thinking about the mind. We can kind of predict why this isn't going to work too well, but okay. Why do I wish to resist this suggestion? Mainly because of Occam's razor. It seems to me that science is increasingly giving us a viewpoint whereby organisms are able to be seen as physiochemical mechanisms. It seems that even the behavior of man himself will one day be explicable in mechanistic terms. There does seem to be, so far as science is concerned, nothing in the world but increasingly complex arrangements of physical constituents. All except for one place, in consciousness. That is, for a full description of what is going on in a man, you would have to mention not only the physical processes of his tissues, glands, nervous system, and so forth, but also his states of consciousness, his visual, auditory, and tactual sensations, his aches and pains. That these should be correlated with brain processes does not help. For to say that they are correlated is to say that they are something over and above, at least other. You cannot correlate something with itself. You correlate footprints with burglars, but not Bill Sikes, the burglar, with Bill Sikes, the burglar. So sensations, states of consciousness, do seem to be the one sort of thing left outside the physicalist picture. And for various reasons, I just cannot believe that this can be so. That everything should be explicable in terms of physics, together of course, with descriptions of the ways in which the parts are put together. Roughly, biology is to physics as radio engineering is to electromagnetism, except the occurrence of sensations seems to me to be frankly unbelievable. All right, so it looks like you might be a reductionist too. Such sensations would be nomonological dangers, quote unquote, to use Fiegel's expression. It is not often realized how odd would be the laws whereby these nominal danglers would dangle. It is sometimes asked, why can't there be psychological laws which are of a novel sort, just as the laws of electricity and magnetism were novelties from the standpoint of Newtonian mechanics? Certainly, we're pretty sure in the future to come across new ultimate laws of a novel type, but I expect them to relate simple constituents. For example, whatever ultimate particles are then in vogue. I cannot believe that ultimate laws of nature could relate simple constituents to configurations consisting of perhaps billions of neurons, and goodness knows how many billions of ultimate particles, all put together for all the world as though their main purpose in life was to be a negative feedback mechanism of a complicated sort. Such ultimate laws would be like nothing so far known in science. They have a queer smell to them. I am just unable to believe in the nomological dangers themselves, or in the laws whereby they would dangle. If any philosophical arguments seem to compel us to believe in such things, I would suspect a catch in the argument. In any case, it is the object of this paper to show that there are no philosophical arguments which compel us to be dualists. Okay, take a deep breath. He's saying an awful lot, just sort of giving us his prejudices at the beginning and where he's arguing from. But first, he's saying, like, look, um, I just believe that the world is physical and that everything will have physical explanations, including all of your experiences. And so I don't want to say you have a mental experience and a thing in the brain that's happening and that they happen together and so we can correlate them. I want to say the thing in the brain that's happening is all there is. Or I want to deny that there even is something that's happening in your internal subconscious, that your consciousness. That thing, that talk like that seems meaningless to me. And we saw how the logical positivists could get to such a position, right? They start by analyzing often the way we're using words, and they try to say, look, basically they use a filter that says, unless you can point at something with your words that other people can also measure and see, then what you're saying is not about anything. So the first question we could ask is, now wait a minute, what if every man is an island unto himself and each individual person can do their own subjective experiments and say, is it like something for me to see red? Is it like something to be in pain? I seem to have a conscious experience of the world. And then you could just say, well, I can do that myself, but I can't share that data with anybody else. And I have the famous philosophical problem of other minds to deal with when it comes to believing that other people can do that. But there are treatments of that philosophical problem and that attempt to get out of it. And also, who cares? Who cares? Why can't I just say, I will never have evidence of this, but that doesn't mean that it's a meaningless thing I'm discussing. But the behaviorists are not inclined that way. And again, we saw how the logical positivists were attempting to do this sort of thing, where they basically say, if you're not pointing at something that could be seen by somebody else, you're not talking about anything meaningful. And I can just deny that there's any meaning to it. So maybe consciousness is an illusion. Maybe free will is an illusion. Maybe we should take all the terms that we think are important to us that we don't want to get rid of, like some so and so is in pain, and just redefine it as the things that are obvious and measurable, and then say that there's nothing else beyond that. Now, notice this is a philosophical position. So they're not just saying we should do this strategically so that we can have a good science about something that's beyond all of that. They're saying there is nothing beyond all of that. Philosophically, they're trying to argue that you have an illusion that there's something beyond all of that, maybe, but there's no good philosophical reason to think so. And then he says, look, if there were a bunch of psychological realities in the world, they'd have to be described by some sort of laws, right? If there is mind at all, then, but what kind of laws would govern very complicated arrangements of billions of neurons and particles and all sorts of things that we just haven't discovered yet? Maybe if we were slicing a cork in half, we could discover a new law about something very basic and simple. But I just don't believe that we're going to suddenly discover physical laws that govern how your mind works, not how your brain works, right? We have physical laws for describing how your brain works. He's fine with that. He's super thrilled about it. But he says, if you want me to agree that there is a mind, it's got to be something I could think about scientifically and describe scientifically, and that it's in the world in a physical sort of a way, and it isn't. So I'm going to deny that that is meaningful at all, that all talk about that is meaningful. Okay, so we know where he's coming from. The above is largely a confession of faith, he says. All right, this is I believe that it will be understandable scientifically, the whole world, including the subconscious mental parts. But it explains why I find Wittgenstein's position, as I construe it, so congenial. For on this view, there are, in a sense, no sensations. A man is a vast arrangement of physical particles, but there are not, over and above this, sensations or states of consciousness. There are just behavioral facts about this vast mechanism, such as that it expresses a temptation, a behavioral disposition to say, quote, there is a yellowish red patch on the wall. So I demonstrate a temptation to say that, but that's all that's being shown when I talk about something like that. Or that it goes through a sophisticated sort of wince. That is, it says, I am in pain. Admittedly, Wittgenstein says that though the sensation is not a something, it is nevertheless not a nothing either. But this need only mean that the word ache has a use. An ache is a thing, but only in an innocuous sense, in which the plain man in the first paragraph of Frege's Foundations of Arithmetic answers the question, what is the number one? By a thing. It should be noted that when I assert that to say I have a yellowish orange after image is to express a temptation to assert the physical object statement. There is a yellowish orange patch on the wall. I mean, that saying, I have a yellowish orange after image, is partly the exercise of the disposition, which is the temptation. It is not to report that I have the temptation any more than is I love you normally a report that I love someone. Saying I love you is just part of the behavior, which is the exercise of the disposition of loving someone. Okay, let's be careful about this because it might, right? It seems like you got it, and that's why you're laughing about how absurd it is. But he's not saying I love you is evidence that I love you. Saying I love you is evidence of the disposition of loving someone. Well, wait a minute. Let me take back what I said there. I'm not being careful enough in my words. Saying I love you is not reporting a subjective state of consciousness in my own internal thought life. What it is saying this mass of particles here is in the disposition, is inclined to speak in a way which is the very definition of being in love. The disposition to say I love you is what we mean by a person is in love, partly, right? Maybe the disposition to give a back rub, maybe the disposition to ask you how you're doing or to say good morning, sweetheart. But all of those behaviors, which we can point to and measure and recognize in the physical world, that's all it means to be in love. Collect all of those, get them all figured out, figure out if you need 40% of them in order or whatever, but just say, okay, doing those types of things is what it means to be in love. And there's nothing beyond it that you're talking about, at least not meaningfully. Okay, though for the reasons given above, I'm very receptive to the above expressive account of sensation statements, I do not feel that it will quite do the trick. Maybe this is because I have not thought it out sufficiently, but it does seem to me as though when a person says, I have an after image, he is making a genuine report. And that when he says, I have a pain, he is doing more than replace pain behavior. And that this more is not just to say that he is in distress. I am not so sure, however, that to admit I am not so sure that to admit this is to admit that there are non-physical correlates of brain processes. Why should not sensations just be brain processes of a certain sort? There are, of course, well-known, as well as lesser-known, philosophical objections to the view that reports of sensations are reports of brain processes, but I shall try to argue that these arguments are by no means as cogent as is commonly thought to be the case. Let me first try to state more accurately the thesis that sensations are brain processes. It is not the thesis that, for example, after image or ache means the same as brain process of sort X, where X is replaced by a description of a certain sort of brain process. It is that insofar as after image or ache, those words, is a report of a process. It is a report of a process that happens to be a brain process. It follows that the thesis does not claim that sensation statements can be translated into statements about brain processes, nor does it claim that the logic of a sensation statement is the same as that of a brain process statement. All it claims is that insofar as a sensation statement is a report of something, that something is in fact a brain process. Sensations are nothing over and above brain processes. Nations are nothing over and above citizens. But this does not prevent the logic of nation statements being very different from the logic of citizen statements, nor does it ensure the translatability of nation statements into citizen statements. I do not, however, wish to assert that the relation of sensation statements to brain process statements is very likely to be a nation statement to citizen statements, is very like that of nation statements to citizen statements. Nations do not just happen to be nothing over and above citizens. For example, I bring in the nation's example merely to make a negative point that the fact that the logic of A statements is different from that of B statements does not ensure that A's are nothing over and above B's. Okay. All right, buddy, we're ready. We're ready. We're going to prepare our buttholes for this. Let's prepare ourselves for the boxing match. Let him punch us a bunch with this. His first section is remarks on identity. When I say that a sensation is a brain process, or that lightning is an electric discharge, I am using is in the sense of strict identity, just as in this case necessary proposition 7 is identical with the smallest prime number greater than 5. When I say that a sensation is a brain process or that lightning is an electric discharge, I do not mean just that the sensation is somehow spatially or temporally continuous with the brain processes, with the brain process, or that the lightning is just spatially or temporally continuous with the discharge. When, on the other hand, I say that the successful general is the same person as the small boy who stole the apples, I mean only that the successful general I see before me is a time slice of the same four-dimensional object of which the small boy stealing apples is an earlier time slice. However, the four-dimensional object, which is the general I see before me, for its late time slice is identical in the strict sense with the four-dimensional object which has the small boy stealing apples for an early time slice. I distinguish these two senses of is identical with because I wish to make it clear that the brain process doctrine asserts identity in the strict sense. Okay, we understand what you're saying, buddy. You're saying being in love is these brain processes and nothing more. It's not that being in love is a thing and it correlates to brain processes. It's not that brain processes of love, of being in love happen, and that's what makes being in love happen in another sense. He's saying that's all there is. All there is your big massive particles firing off and doing different things. And when they do it in the being in love way, then you are in love, not just because it tells me you're in love, but that's what it means to be in love. And that's all there is to it. I shall now discuss various possible objections to the view that the processes reported in sensation statements are in fact processes in the brain. Most of us have met some of these objections in our first year as philosophy students. All the more reason to take a good look at them. Others of the objections will be more recondite and subtle. Objection 1. Okay, he's going to do the whole Thomas Aquinas thing and give us objection 1, response 1, objection 2. Okay, objection 1. Any illiterate peasant can talk perfectly well about his after images, or how things look or feel to him, or about his aches and pains, and yet he may know nothing whatever about neurophysiology. A man may, like Aristotle, believe that the brain is an organ for cooling the body without any impairment of his ability to make true statements about his sensations. Hence, the things we are talking about when we describe our sensations cannot be processes in the brain. That's his straw man, or that's his representation of argument 1. His reply is, you might as well say that a nation of slugabeds who never saw the morning star or knew of its existence, or who had never thought of the expression the morning star, but who used the expression the evening star perfectly well, could not use this expression to refer to the same entity as we refer to and describe as the morning star. You may object that the morning star is, in a sense, not the very same thing as the evening star, but only something spatio-temporally continuous with it. That is, you may say that the morning star is not the evening star in the strict sense of identity that I discussed earlier. There is, however, a more plausible example. Consider lightning. Modern physical science tells us that lightning is a certain kind of electrical discharge due to ionization of clouds of water vapor in the atmosphere. This, it is now believed, is what the true nature of lightning is. Note that there are not two things, a flash of lightning and an electrical discharge. There is one thing, a flash of lightning, which is described scientifically as an electrical discharge to the earth from a cloud of ionized water molecules. The case is not at all like that of explaining a footprint by reference to a burglar. We say that what lightning really is, what its true nature and revealed by science is an electrical discharge. It is not the true nature of a footprint to be a burglar. To forestall irrelevant objections, I should like to make it clear that by lightning, I mean the publicly observable physical object lightning, not a physical sense datum of lightning. I say that the publicly observable physical object lightning is, in fact, the electrical discharge, not just a correlate of it. The sense datum, or rather the having of the sense datum, the look of lightning, may well, in my view, be a correlate of the electrical discharge. For in my view, it is a brain state caused by the lightning. Oh my God. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay. But we should no more confuse sensations of lightning with lightning than we confuse sensations of a table with a table. Okay. It's clear enough what he's saying, but just in case, let's go slow so we don't get lost on anything else. 3 things are happening. 4 things are happening. 6 things are happening. No, 2 things are happening, he says. 2 things are happening. The lightning happens, and I perceive the lightning. The first one is electrical discharge. It's a physically describable scientific thing. The second one is a brain process, and it's a physically describable thing. That's it. Right? There's not an electrical discharge which makes a lightning, which creates an impression, which has a subjective feel to it, and all that. No, there's 2 things happening. There's the lightning, and there's my perception of the lightning, and both of them are totally physical things. In short, the reply to objection 1 is that there can be contingent statements of the form A is identical with B, and a person may well know that something is an A without knowing that it is a B. An illiterate peasant might be able to talk about his sensations without knowing about brain processes, just as he can talk about lightning, though he knows nothing of electricity. All right. So let's understand the objection. The objection is, now wait a minute, if I know nothing about brain processes, how is it that I can speak accurately about my sensations? He says, of course you can. You have your sensations. They're just your brain processes. You don't know that they're just your brain processes, and you don't know what those brain processes are, and maybe you don't even know about neurons, and maybe you think the brain is an organ for cooling the body and has nothing to do with your sensations. None of that matters. You could know nothing about electrons and nothing about electrical discharges, and you could see the lightning and say, there's the spirit of Zeus shooting out. It doesn't matter if you don't understand it. You still have the brain process experience of witnessing a physical event, and it's still true that that physical event is a discharge of electricity, and you don't have to know about it to be able to talk about it because you are having the sensation. So let's be done with this first objection. This first objection, he says, doesn't count because you think you shouldn't be able to talk about something. You still experience it. You can still talk about it without knowing it. You are experiencing or you are manifesting brain processes, and you're talking about which ones you're manifesting. And you might even be right sometimes about your internal your internal brain processes without knowing that that's what you're talking about. Just like you might be correct in saying lightning struck that hill without knowing anything about electrical discharges. Okay, objection 2. It is only a contingent fact, if it is a fact, that when we have a certain kind of sensation, there is a certain kind of process in our brain. Indeed, it is possible, though perhaps in the highest degree unlikely, that our present physiological theories will be as out of date as the ancient theory concerning or connecting mental processes with goings on in the heart. We might discover that's more true than we. It follows that when we report a sensation, we are not reporting a brain process. Okay, start again. Let's look at this objection. It's just a contingent fact that you have brain processes that correlate with and go along with what's going on in your sensations. Our present physiological theories might be so out of date one day that we give up on all of the brain process talk that we have. It follows that, okay, so his reply is, the objection certainly proves that when I say I have an after image, we cannot mean something of the form of I have such and such a brain process. We don't mean that. But this does not show that what we report having an after image is not, in fact, a brain process. I see lightning does not mean I see an electrical discharge. Indeed, it is logically possible, though highly unlikely, that the electrical discharge account of lightning might one day be given up. Again, I see the evening star does not mean the same thing as I see the morning star. And yet the evening star and the morning star are one and the same thing, is a contingent proposition. Possibly, objection 2 derives some of its apparent strength from a fido theory of meaning. If the meaning of an expression were what the expression named, then of course it would follow from the fact that sensation and brain process have different meanings, that they cannot name one and the same thing. All right. So even if our science is wrong and it's not really brain processes, maybe it's brain states, maybe it's a new thing we'll discover called brain whirlpools, or maybe it's subatomic spinning in one direction or another, or counterclockwise. Like being in love is when your neurons are doing some weird kind of beehive dance, and it's not really brain processes as whatever we're defining them in neuroscience now. It's so different that we come up with different terminology for it. It doesn't matter, because we're talking about one and the same thing, even if we're wrong right now, and that thing is a physical thing. Objection 3. I mean, you can see how faithful he is. This is a man of faith. I don't know what to say. It's well, he's not stupid, that's for sure. I don't mean to mock him. This is not a stupid thing to say, but it's definitely, I don't know. I'm not sure I see the strength of the arguments yet. Let's see. Even if objections 1 and 2 do not prove that sensations are something over and above brain processes, they do prove that the qualities of sensations are something over and above the qualities of brain processes. That is, it may be possible to get out of asserting the existence of irreducibly psychic processes, but not out of asserting the existence of irreducibly psychic properties. For suppose we identify the morning star with the evening star, then there must be some properties which logically imply that the being the morning star, that of being the morning star, and quite distinct properties which entail that of being the evening star. Again, there must be some properties, for example, that of being a yellow flash, which are logically distinct from those in the physicalist story. So that's his third objection. What's the third objection? It's the qualia argument. The qualia argument is, even if you could reduce all of psychology to neuroscience, you're never going to be able to talk about why it feels like something to see red, why it feels like something to feel pain, right? The quality of the experience is above and beyond it, even if the mental process is nothing but the physical process. Even if there's something that isn't physical in that way, or isn't brain processes in that way. Okay. In his response, oh no, I'm sorry, the argument goes on, I think. Indeed, it might be thought that the objection succeeds at one jump. Okay, no, this must be his response. He just didn't put in reply this time. Okay. It seems like that succeeds. For consider the property of being a yellow flash. It might seem that this property lies inevitably outside the physicalist framework within which I am trying to work, either by yellow being an objective emergent property of physical objects, or else by being a power to produce yellow sense data, where yellow in this second instantiation of the word refers to a purely phenomenal or introspective quality, right? The quality of seeing yellowness. I must therefore digress for a moment and indicate how I deal with secondary qualities. I shall concentrate on color. First of all, let me introduce the concept of a normal percipient. One person is more a normal percipient than another if he can make color discriminations that the other cannot. For example, if person A can pick a lettuce leaf out of a heap of cabbage leaves, whereas person B cannot, though he can pick a lettuce leaf out of a heap of beetroot leaves, then A is more normal than B. I am assuming that A and B are not given time to distinguish the leaves by their slight difference in shape and so forth. From the concept of more normal than, it is easy to see how we can introduce the concept of normal. Of course, Eskimos may make the finest discriminations at the blue end of the spectrum, Hottentots at the red end. In this case, the concept of a normal percipient is a slightly idealized one, rather like that of the mean sun in astronomical chronology. There is no need to go into such subtleties now. I say that this is red means something roughly like a normal percipient would not easily pick this out of a clump of geranium petals, though he would pick it out of a clump of lettuce leaves. That's what I mean by this is red. What I mean by this is red is you wouldn't be able, it would be camouflaged if it was put with a bunch of other red things, like, let's not make our definition circular. It would not be easily standing out in a clump of geranium petals, but it would easily stand out amongst a bunch of lettuce leaves. Of course, it does not exactly mean this. A person might know the meaning of red without knowing anything about geraniums or even about normal percipients. But the point is that a person can be trained to say this is red of objects which would not easily be picked out of geranium petals by a normal percipient and so on. Wow. So you see all the parts of all the terminology of that sentence is something that he hopes allows him to completely escape from any talk of anything subjective. Because I could point to someone and say they're a normal percipient. Okay, how come? Well, because we gave 1,000 people a survey of the different colors of things. This guy basically can pick them out the same as everybody else. And then I say, okay, well, this is red is accurate thing to say of objects which would not be easily picked out from geranium petals by a normal percipient. Note that even a colorblind person can reasonably assert that something is red, though of course he needs to use another human being, not just himself, as his color meter. This account of secondary qualities explains their unimportance in physics, for obviously the discriminations and lack of discriminations made by a very complex neurophysiological mechanism are hardly likely to correspond to simple and non-arbitrary distinctions in nature. I therefore elucidate colors as powers in Locke's sense, to evoke certain sorts of discriminatory responses in human beings. They are also, of course, powers to cause sensations in human beings, an account still nearer Locke's. But these sensations, I am arguing, are identifiable with brain processes. He just wants to keep denying there's anything beyond that. Now, how do I get over the objection that a sensation can be identified with a brain process only if it has some phenomenal property, not possessed by brain processes, whereby one half of the identification may be, so to speak, pinned down? His reply to that is, my suggestion is as follows. When a person says, I see a yellowish orange after image, he is saying something like this. There is something going on which is like what is going on when I have my eyes open, am awake, and there's an orange illuminated, and there is an orange illuminated in good light in front of me. That is when I really see an orange. And there's no reason why a person should not say the same thing when he is having a veridical sense datum, so long as we construe like in the last sentence in such a sense that something can be like itself. Notice that the italicized words, namely, there is something going on which is like what is going on when, are all quasi-logical or topic neutral words. This explains why the ancient Greek peasants' report about his sensations can be neutral between dualistic metaphysics or my materialistic metaphysics. It explains how sensations can be brain processes, and yet how a man who reports them need know nothing about brain processes, for he reports them only very abstractly as something going on which is like what is going on when. Similarly, a person may say, someone is in the room, thus reporting truly that the doctor is in the room, even though he has never heard of doctors. There are not two people in the room, someone and the doctor. And just, yeah, somebody walks into a room. I don't know what doctors are. I say someone is in the room. I can be right about that, even though I don't know that he's a doctor and I don't even know what doctors are. I'm still accurate at reporting that he's in the room. Likewise, when I say I am experiencing a yellow orangish after image, every time I blink my eyes, I see this blob everywhere I look, and it's there and blah blah blah. What am I really saying? He said, let's translate what I'm saying, and this is all it means. I'm saying something is going on, which is like what's going on when I am actually looking at something orange. I'm just reporting a brain process. I might not know about brain processes. I might not know that brain processes are really all that's going on and that that's all I'm reporting. It doesn't matter. That's what I'm saying. And so I can talk about these things without believing this theory or knowing anything about the science. And the science could still be true. My theory could still be true that it's brain processes and nothing else. This account of sensation statements also explains the similar elusiveness of raw fields, why no one seems to be able to pin any properties on them. Raw fields, raw fields, F-E-E-L-S, in my view, are colorless for the very same reason that something is colorless. This does not mean that sensations do not have plenty of properties, for if they are brain processes, they certainly have lots of neurological properties. It only means that in speaking of them as being like or unlike one another, we need not know or mention these properties. This, then, is how I would reply to objection 3. The strength of my reply depends on the possibility of our being able to report that one thing is like another without being able to state the respect in which it is like. I do not see why this should not be so. If we think cybernetically about the nervous system, we can envisage it as able to respond to certain likenesses of its internal processes. Part of the brain pointed at another part of the brain. Okay. Um, without being able to do more. It would be easier to build a machine which would tell us, say, on a punched tape, whether or not two objects were similar, than it would be to build a machine which would report wherein the similarities consisted. So there's no challenge there, he says. Let's talk about a few ideas here in mind philosophy that he's referencing and making use of, but that are not exactly the point of his paper or this paragraph here. So I'm going to ask you quickly, what is the sum of 7 and 5? And you would say 12, right? I don't want to make you unmute and say it, but okay. And then I'm going to ask you the following question. So I say, what's the sum of 7 and 5? And you say 12. And then I'm going to ask you this question. How did you do that? Got any ideas? I said, what's the sum of 7 and 5? You said 12. Okay. Clearly you can add 7 and 5. Did you memorize that answer when you were young because you heard it so often? Did you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so that I'm counting 7 beyond 5 and I got to 12? Are you doing what a computer does and taking a slot with a number and doing a binary additive function and then producing the answer? Who knows? Who knows what you're doing? Because you don't have access to how that part of your brain works. You just ask part of your brain to do something and give the answer, and then you tell me what the answer is. You actually don't know what your brain's doing on that level. He's just simply pointing out that we can be aware of some of what our brain is doing and not aware of everything our brain is doing. My brain is producing the answer 12 to the question, to the prompt, what is the sum of 7 and 5? I can have access to that both externally because I can see myself answer it or somebody else could see me answer it, but I can know that my brain is telling me say 12, say 12, say 12. Okay. But I don't actually know what part of my brain is being utilized or what processes are happening or how it's happening. I don't have access to that. So you can have access to some of what your brain's doing and not others of what your brain's doing. That's one issue there, which is related to his point, which says that, well, then there's no objection. You can know some of it, not all of it. But what else is going on here? Oh, how about AI? Could we ever build an AI intelligence with a subconscious? Sure. That's actually all we've been doing. It's super easy. All I have to do is write a computer program that responds to the question, what is 7 and 5 correctly with the number 12. Maybe it performs an additive function or it has a database of answers that it draws from or whatever. And then respond to the question, how did you do that with, I have no idea. So if you say, what is 5 and 7? It says 12. Say, how did you do that? I don't know. All right. So anyway, um, we'll have time to talk about all the silly ideas and the interesting ideas of AI later. Objection 4. The after image is not in physical space. Okay. I'm looking at the after image, but it's not really there. The brain process is in physical space. So the after image is not a brain process. There's a philosophical argument against his position. He says, now, wait a minute. You're telling me that the after image is just a brain process, but a brain process is in physical space, but the after image isn't really there. His reply, this is an ignoratio elenchi. I am not arguing that the after image is a brain process, but that the experience of having an after image is a brain process. It is the experience which is reported in the introspective report. Similarly, if it is objected that the after image is yellowy orange, my reply is that it is the experience of seeing yellowy orange that is being described, and this experience is not a yellowy orange something, right? The brain process is not yellowy orange. The brain process is the brain process which happens okay, I have to be careful and use this behavioralist language. The brain process is the yellowy orange experience, but it is not itself yellowy orange, which would seem to suggest that it can't possibly be. Right, there's the qualia argument again, but let's put that one aside. It's on a different objection. So the brain process is the experience of yellowy orangeness that I am reporting when I say I think I'm seeing a yellowy orange blob. I'm saying something is going on in my brain, which is the same thing that goes on when I'm actually seeing yellowy orange things. But that doesn't mean that the process in the brain is yellowy orange. It doesn't mean that the neurons became yellowy orange. It doesn't mean that anything about it is yellowy orange. There's a distinction there. And it's weird that there's a distinction because it does seem like he has to rely on a qualia argument then, but okay. Blah, 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 blah. Seeing as experiencing. So to say that a brain process cannot be yellowy orange is not to say that a brain process cannot, in fact, be the experience of having a yellowy orange after image. There is, in a sense, no such thing as an after image or a sense datum, though there is such a thing as the experience of having an image. And this experience is described indirectly in material object language, not in phenomenal language, for there is no such thing. We describe the experience by saying, in effect, that it is like the experience we have when, for example, we really see a yellowy orange patch on the wall. Trees and wallpaper can be green, but not the experience of seeing or imagining a tree or wallpaper. Or if they are described as green or yellow, this can only be in a derived sense. Okay, let's move on. Objection 5. It would make sense to say of a molecular movement in the brain that it is swift or slow, straight or circular, but it makes no sense to say this of the experience of seeing something yellow. Okay, so here's the new objection. We'll expand on it a little bit since he's not making a strong case in each of these short paragraphs. So I'm telling you, I think my brain process is all that's going on when I have the experience of seeming to see a yellowy orange blotch on the wall as an after image. And then you say to me, wait a minute, brain processes are things that can be reduced to talk about molecular motion. So neurons and synapses and ions being translated between them like dominoes to send waves of electricity through and blah, 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 blah. So those things could be fast or they could be slow. They could be straight or they could be circular. But it makes no sense to say that there's anything about my experience of yellowness that is fast or slow or straight or circular. So the quality of being a physical material constituent of the brain going through processes are not the qualities of the experiences. So how could they be the same thing? Reply. So far, we have not given sense to talk of experience as swift or slow, straight or circular, but I am not claiming that experience and brain process mean the same or even that they have the same logic. Somebody and the doctor do not have the same logic. But this does not lead us to suppose that talking about somebody telephoning is talking about someone over and above, say, the doctor. The ordinary man when he reports an experience is reporting that something is going on, but he leaves it open as to what sort of thing is going on, whether in a material solid medium or perhaps in some sort of gaseous medium or even perhaps in some sort of non-spatial medium, if that makes sense. All that I am saying is that experience and brain process may in fact refer to the same thing. And if so, we may easily adopt a convention, which is not a change in our present rules for the use of experience words, but in addition to them, whereby it would make sense to talk of an experience in terms appropriate to physical processes. We could reread that objection and its response a bit more. It would help us to understand his position. Almost as an experience and brain process may be. I know that's what you're saying, but are you contradicting yourself? The ordinary man, when he reports an experience, is reporting that something is going on. He leaves open what sort of a thing it is. And blah, blah, blah. All right, you know what? Let's be charitable here. He's very smart, so it's not like he needs us to bend over backwards. Whatever's going on in your brain that is the same thing as the experiences that you're having. It's not one ion moving from one neuron to one synapse. It's really, really complicated. The number of connections between the neurons in your brain, I think, outnumbers the stars, at least in the galaxy, maybe the universe, maybe by an order of magnitude. There's a lot of complexity and potential here for very complicated things to be going on. And we don't know what those things are right now. So it's premature to say that the types of things that are going on in the brain don't have the same type of quality as the experience, and they could actually be the same thing. Objection 6. Sensations are private. Brain processes are public. If I sincerely say, I see a yellowish orange after image, I am not making a verbal mistake. And I'm not making a verbal mistake, then I cannot be wrong. Oh, that's an interesting thing about that statement. You can't be wrong about that statement. You could be lying about it. You could be making a logical or a verbal mistake, but you can't, if you're having the experience, you're having the experience. Maybe if you're a behaviorist, simply saying it means you are having the experience and you can't lie about it in a sense, because saying it is a part of the behavioral replacement of having the experience. I'm not sure if he means to say that. But I can be wrong about brain processes, says the objection. The scientist looking into my brain might be having an illusion. Moreover, it makes sense to say that two or more people are observing the same brain process, but not that two or more people are reporting the same inner experience. Okay, so what would happen if we put people into, Neuralink is doing this, right? What if we were to start measuring what's going on with the neurons when a person reports that they're imagining blueness, or they're looking at a picture of a mule or something? What if those processes are different between two people? Or what if two people could have the same type of measurable process, but report that they're thinking about two different colors at the same time? So, doesn't that mean that these are not the same thing? Reply: this shows that the language of introspective reports has a different logic from the language of material processes. It is obvious that until the brain process theory is much improved and widely accepted, there will be no criteria for saying Smith has an experience of such and such a sort, except Smith's introspective reports. So we have adopted a rule of language that normally what Smith says goes. Okay. I didn't mention this earlier, but from the beginning, what we have here are a lot of promissory notes, right? Eventually, we'll figure this all out scientifically. And there are philosophers saying, no, you won't. No, you won't. I don't just doubt it. Here's an argument for why you never could. But he's saying, I want to get away with those arguments. They're not as impressive as you think they are. And eventually, we will get this all figured out. And it will just be stuff that we could reduce to physics. All right. I mean, we're going to reduce psychology to brain processes of a biological organism, and then we'll reduce the biology to the chemistry of what's going on, and we'll reduce the chemistry to the physical communication of ions between neurons. And we could actually describe in physical language what it means to think about apples for 15 minutes. All in terms of electrons and protons bouncing into each other and attracting each other and moving around. It's like, okay, it might be really impractical to do that. It might take like 10 billion books just to write about what an inchworm is thinking, or what its brain processes are, as it's eating some dirt or something. But in principle, we could reduce it all. Eventually, we'll have a theory of brain processes, which will allow us to have a science to use appropriate language to do this, but that science will be grounded in and have as its foundation harder sciences, eventually resulting in physics. Okay. Objection 7. I can imagine myself turning to stone and yet having images, aches, pains, and so on. Reply. I can imagine that the electrical theory of lightning is false, that lightning is some sort of purely optical phenomenon. I can imagine that lightning is not an electrical discharge. I can imagine that the evening star is not the morning star, but it is. All the objection shows is that experience and brain process do not have the same meaning. It does not show that an experience is not, in fact, a brain process. So he keeps saying that they don't mean the same thing, but that they are, in fact, the same thing. So let's pause here, because a lot of his objections are taking that form, and that looks like a contradiction. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like he says, I call it a brain process, you call it an experience. It's a brain process, right? Basically saying it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you call it experience. To me, that means it's a brain process.
Yeah, they are the same thing. Now, he might even say, I want to talk about it in terms of experiences too, because that's a more natural language and it has its own logic. And all of that's fine. All of that's completely fine. But if you knew what was really going on, you would know that all that language could be retranslated into this language. So a lot of the objections are, wait a minute, when we talk like this, we don't talk like this, and they're not the same thing. So clearly it's not the same thing. He's saying, no, it is. It's sort of like two different languages to talk about the same thing, but really it is the same thing, exactly as you just said. Okay. This objection is perhaps much the same as one which can be summed up by the slogan, what can be composed of nothing cannot be composed of anything. The argument goes as follows. On the brain process thesis, the identity between the brain process and the experience is a contingent one, so it is logically possible that there should be no brain process and no process of any other sort either. No heart process, no kidney process, no liver process. There would be the experience, but no corresponding physiological process with which we might be able to identify it empirically. I suspect that the objector is thinking of the experience as a ghostly entity. Ooh, they really hate this kind of language, and you can pick up the snark when they start using it. They like to mock this type of thinking. So it is composed of something, not of nothing after all, right? It's like a floaty, ghosty thing out there in this realm of Cartesian mental substances or something. You must be thinking like that, he says. On his view, it is composed. Oh, I just remembered. There's a really well-written essay or chapter in a book by Daniel Dennett, which makes the case he's making here even stronger. Maybe we should read that at some point, because we got to understand what the different camps are, and it's worth understanding the best versions of this. All right, perhaps the counter reply will be that the experience is simple and uncompounded, and so it is not composed of anything after all. This seems to be a quibble, for if it were taken seriously, the remark, what can be composed of nothing cannot be composed of anything, could be recast as an a priori argument against Democritus and atomism, and for Descartes and infinite divisibility. And it seems odd that a question of this sort could be settled a priori. We must therefore construe the word composed in a very weak sense, which would allow us to say that even an indivisible atom is composed of something, namely itself. The dualist cannot really say that an experience can be composed of nothing, for he holds that experiences are something over and above material processes. That is, they are a sort of ghost stuff. I say that the dualist hypothesis is a perfectly intelligible one, but I say that experiences are not to be identified with ghost stuff, but with brain stuff. This is another hypothesis, and in my view, a very plausible one. The present argument cannot knock it down a priori. Okay, so he doesn't like this objection. So what is this objection? Let's actually expound on it a bit, because we see a lot of hints about what he's referring to here, especially with the word simple. And our little mind body section that we did in the year one backbone course was really good setup for this paragraph, right? So the idea that something could be simple means that it has no parts. It doesn't have a left and a right, a north and a south. It's not composed of multiple things. He says, yeah, I get that the experience seems to you that it might be simple, and maybe it even is. But the point is that you still think it's something. You think it's something to talk about. You think it's real and it's something above and beyond simple brain processes. Well, what do you have left? Ghosty non-material things that are in no location and all of that. It's like, okay, maybe that's true. It's intelligible. It's possible. I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, we're not going to find ghosts. We're not going to find this mysterious consciousness thing that's all simple and weird. And it's something, I insist it's something, but it's not material. We're going to discover that it's all material. It's all the expression of what matter can do when it's sophisticatedly organized and going through processes. In any case, he says, you can't settle that a priori, which is what that objection's trying to do. It's trying to say, as a rationalist, let me think about what the quality of seeing yellowness is like. Oh, it's basic. It's foundational. There's no way to argue to it. If I'm having the experience, I'm having the experience. Even if I'm a brain in a vat or in a matrix or in Plato's cave or something, the yellowness experience is definitely happening when I think it's happening. So what do I know about this thing? It's like, do I read books and get educated so that I can be sophisticated enough to experience yellow? No, it's basic. I just start out. It's like a building block of being a person, if you're not colorblind or whatever. But the experience is just, I look at the litmus paper and I check to see if it's yellow, but I don't have to build something beneath that. And so the objection might say, therefore, I can know a priori without experience, without investigating things, without going in a time machine 10,000 years into the future and reading all of these great neuroscience textbooks on brain processes that we figured out. I don't have to do any of that. I just have the experience. It's a part of being. And therefore, it's nothing like a composite, complicated process made up of lots of little parts. It's simple. And he says, well, it could be. It could be, but you still think it's something. And that means you either think it's some ghostly weird thing that we can't really measure and it's or it's something physical. And I think it's something physical. In any case, I don't think we get to settle it a priori, he says. All right. I mean, I think the a priori argument is powerful enough, but okay. Objection 8, the beetle in the box objection. How could descriptions of experiences, if these are genuine reports, get a foothold in language? For any rule of language must have public criteria for its correct application. That's interesting. How could it possibly be? Descriptions of experience. Any rule of language must have public criteria for its correct application. What the objector here is saying, look at us. Look at us people. We sing songs and write poems about being in pain. And we recognize the meanings of those poems and those songs. And we talk about it and we report things to our doctors who frown and look at us like, oh, I'm so sorry you're in pain. We understand what we're talking about. How could language develop an acceptable set of rules to talk about something that none of us can point to so that we can all agree about what we're talking about? It should be impossible that we'd be able to talk about these things at all. His reply, the change from describing how things are to describing how we feel is just a change from uninhibitedly saying this is so by saying this looks so. That is, when the naive person might be tempted to say, there is a patch of light on the wall which moves whenever I move my eyes, or a pin is being stuck into me. We have learned how to resist this temptation and say, instead, it looks as though there is a patch of light on the wallpaper, or it feels as though someone were sticking a pin into me. The introspective account allows us or tells us about the individual's state of consciousness in the same way as does I see a patch of light or I feel a pin being stuck into me. Does that really work? Does that really work? Oh, yeah, I think it works. I think it works. Okay, so what he's saying is something like caveman A looked at an apple, saw an apple, picked an apple, ate the apple, talked to me about the apple. We all were concerned with apples. And then we were sitting around the campfire the next morning and we said, you know, it would be good. Let's go out and look for some more apples. And we could recognize individuals reporting that they saw apples, coming back and saying, I know where some more apples are. Really, you do? Take me to them. And so it's all publicly available data that the person is reporting their experience of seeing an apple. And so our language rules can be established because what we're really saying is not, hmm. What we're really saying, or what we would be saying if we knew what we were talking about, is not, I have the experience of seeing an apple yesterday and I'd like to show you where that experience happened, but rather the something happened in me that is the sort of thing that happens when I am in the state of saying I'm seeing an apple. Ooh, I really don't know if that works. It still seems like you shouldn't be able to get off the ground with that because well, maybe you can. I'm glad you brought back a bushel of apples. I'm having the experience of seeing the apples. You were talking about these and saying, I found some apples. Let me show you. So I have access to your reports of your experiences, and I have access to my reports of my experiences, and all of that is publicly available. It might work. We're going to have to spend another day just thinking about this paragraph. It might work. It looks as though there's a patch of light on the wall to me, or it feels as though, is what we really mean to say. The introspective account tells us about the individual's state of consciousness in the same way that it as does I see a patch of light or I feel a pin stuck into me. It differs from the corresponding perception statement insofar as it withdraws any claim about what is actually going on in the external world. From the point of view of the psychologist, the change is from talking about the environment to talking about one's perceptual sensations is simply a matter of disinhibiting certain reactions. These are reactions which one normally suppresses because one has learned that in the prevailing circumstances that they are unlikely to provide a good indication of the state of the environment. To say that something looks green to me is simply to say that my experience is like the experience I get when I see that what really is green. I'm really not sure this works, but it's interesting. It could work. In my reply to objection 3, I pointed out the extreme openness or generality of statements which report experiences. This explains why there is no language of private qualities, just as someone, unlike the doctor, is a colorless word. I think there is a language about the private qualities of experience, and I think it's art. But that's a debate for Tartaglia when he's here, because he can push back against me on that as strongly as anybody. So we'll talk about that another time. If it is asked, what is the difference between those brain processes which, in my view, are experiences and those brain processes which are not, I can only reply that it is at present unknown. I have been tempted to conjecture that the difference may in part be that between perception and reception, and that the type of brain process which is an experience might be identifiable with McKay's active matching response. This, however, cannot be the whole story because sometimes I can perceive something unconsciously, as when I take a handkerchief out of a drawer without being aware that I am doing so. But at the very least, we can classify the brain processes which are experiences as those brain processes which are or might have been causal conditions of those pieces of verbal behavior which we call reports of immediate experience. Almost done. I have now considered a number of objections to the brain process thesis. I wish now to conclude with some remarks on the logical status of the thesis itself. UT Place seems to hold that it is a straight out scientific hypothesis. If so, he is partly right and partly wrong. If the issue is between, say, a brain process thesis and a heart thesis, or a liver thesis, or a kidney thesis, then the issue is a purely empirical one, and the verdict is overwhelmingly in favor of the brain. The right sorts of things don't go on in the heart, liver, or kidney, nor do these organs possess the right sort of complexity of structure. On the other hand, if the issue is between a brain or liver or kidney thesis, that is, some form of materialism on the one hand, and epiphenomenalism on the other hand, yeah, he's been explicitly against epiphenomenalism here, then the issue is not an empirical one. For there is no conceivable experiment which could decide between materialism and epiphenomenalism, by the nature of the theory of epiphenomenalism. This latter issue is not like the average straight out empirical issue in science, but like the issue between the 19th century English naturalist Philip Gauss and the orthodox geologists and paleontologists of his day. According to Gauss, the Earth was created about 4000 BC, exactly as described in Genesis, with twisted rock strata, evidence of erosion, and so forth, and all sorts of fossils in their appropriate strata, just as if the usual evolutionist story had been true. Clearly, this theory is in a sense irrefutable. No evidence can possibly tell against it. Let us ignore the theological setting in which Philip Gauss's hypothesis has been placed, thus ruling out objections of a theological kind, such as what a queer God who would go to such elaborate lengths to deceive us and so on. Let's forget about that. Let us suppose that it is held that the universe just began 4004 BC, with the initial conditions just everywhere as they were in 4004 BC, and in particular that our own planet, made with sediment in the rivers, eroded cliffs, fossils in the rocks, and so on. No scientist would ever entertain this as a serious hypothesis, consistent though it is with all possible evidence. The hypothesis offends against the principle of parsimony and simplicity. There would be far too many brute and inexplicable facts. Why are pterodactyl bones just as they are? No explanation in terms of the evolution of pterodactyls from earlier forms of life would any longer be possible. We would have millions of facts about the world as it was in 4004 BC that just have to be accepted. The issue between the brain process theory and epiphenomenalism seems to be of the above sort, assuming that a behavioristic reduction of introspective reports is not possible. If it be agreed that there are no cogent philosophical arguments which force us into accepting dualism, and if the brain process theory and dualism are equally consistent with the facts, then the principles of parsimony and simplicity seem to me to decide overwhelmingly in favor of the brain process theory. As I pointed out earlier, dualism involves a large number of irreducible psychological laws, whereby the nomological dangers dangle of a queer sort, just have to be taken on trust and are just as difficult to swallow as the irreducible facts about the paleontology of the Earth with which we are faced on Philip Gauss's theory. I mean, to be honest, this argument would make a lot more sense if you actually believed that we had a material explanation for the brain processes of all these things, and we don't. He's sort of living in the future where he believes that will happen. It seems to me that both are in the exact
like
same
confirmation bias of saying, just take my word for it, it's going to happen in the future. I'm going to be proven to be right. Just wait how many years, right? It's eventually going to come true. Trust me.
Yeah, and his whole argument here is that the one theory is ugly because you have to accept a bunch of stuff, and the other one, you can just trust the science. It's like, we don't have the science. We actually have to trust just as much that you're going to be able to figure out a science of all this stuff And and there are, of course, philosophical arguments, which we will look at in the qualia section, that say, I know ahead of time you're never going to have word one to say about any of those things. They are by definition the sort of things science can't consider, but that doesn't mean it's not true that it's like something for me to see red.
Well, and it's the experience that brought forth the conclusion of the brain process, right? It's like, why am I having this experience? What does it look like through the brain?
Okay, so it's experience that makes you mean
So
it's
I'm saying it's
experience.
like, so it's the experience itself that led to looking into what is that sensation? What is this experience? Right. And then it's like, this
Okay.
process within the brain. Without that experience, you would have never got to, or that research of the conclusion of, it's a process that takes place in the brain.
Okay, right. We started by immediately having evidence as if we're all scientists doing our own internal experiments saying, what's it like to be? Oh, look, it has a quality to it. We have that already. And then we're going out in search of explanation. So it seems backward to say, I I bet a bunch of physical processes in the brain. He doesn't say, now again, his position isn't a bunch of physical processes in the brain are what makes that quality happen. He's saying that's all there is.
Right.
That's all there is. There's just physical processes in the brain. And you go, well, see me in a couple 500 years when you figure all that out. But even if you do, how could a thing like that be a description of something like this? So, okay, that's not a stupid essay. That's pretty good. And I was reminded of another one by Dennett, which we might have to look up at some point to give an even fairer shake to this position. But we're going to find pretty soon here in this behaviorism section that essentially the philosophers have given up on behaviorism, that the attackers of this theory have sort of won the day. And it just isn't tenable and doesn't work. And that might be something we see in the last essay that we read in this section, which we'll be doing next week. And then what that leaves us with is functionalism as an attempt to keep something like behaviorism alive, but maybe fixing the problems of it, and maybe not, because there's problems with functionalism, and we're going to have debates on that and read different essays on it. All right, we're back. We finally made it. I missed the earlier class on Nietzsche's Zarathustra, so we're probably going to do that later tonight, and I'll probably be up pretty late, everybody. Anybody who's watching, we're going to start by going through, we did it on X Spaces, but it wasn't recorded, and we're going to go through Nietzsche's Zarathustra line by line and decode it and talk about another one of these consummate thinkers in philosophy who have to rely on mythopoetic narrative characterological language to say something that is beyond mere propositional truths, and follow Nietzsche on his journey to try to solve the prophetically recognized by him problem of nihilism, which would rear its ugly head in our day and age, and try to solve it before we even know it's a problem that's coming. And he does it characterologically. So we're going to read that book, and we'll do that later tonight. Right now, let's end the live stream. Let's go into an after talk. We have some stuff to talk about and catch up on real quickly. And so we'll